Today I'm going to share with you the single best question I've ever heard that's created the single fastest shortcut towards succeeding as an entrepreneur. My name is Tim Francis. I am here with you today in Austin, Texas, and today is actually Christmas Day, December the 25th, 2022. Growing up, both of my parents grew up in farming style families where it was all about hard work and very honest work. And neither them nor my grandparents ever really complained. If there was work to be done, they just did it. That's how life was. I also grew up as an athlete as well, where it was all about being first in the gym, last out. So there was that same message again, is it's all about hard work and getting things done. Growing up, I also grew up in a middle-class family, very, very blessed for that. And we also definitely were not the wealthiest within our community. So oftentimes my friends would have all the newest hockey equipment and their families would be going to Disneyland on spring break. And those are just things that we just didn't do. I think it was around that time that I probably decided that, when I grow up, I want to make sure that I have all the financial flexibility to do the things that I wanted to do in life. And so in 2006, I got my degree and I started being able to live life on my terms. And it was all about working hard, all about working as many hours as needed. Oftentimes I would put other things like working out or whatnot completely to the side so that I could just keep working. As I started to attend more workshops and seminars, I started also listening to tons of audiobooks, and I kept hearing, that your network is your net worth. I kept hearing that over and over again. And the bit of the challenge for me was that a lot of the people that I wanted to learn from were super far away. I was living in Edmonton, Canada, which is one of the most northern cities in the world. And here, a lot of the best workshops and seminars were in the United States. Now, I really needed to get this entrepreneurship thing sorted out because I absolutely did not want to go back to a day job. I didn't want to admit defeat. Ever since I'd read Rich Dad Poor Dad in 2001, I wanted nothing more than to be an entrepreneur so I could be free and at liberty to have maximum income while living life on my terms. So I didn't want to fail. I didn't want to go back to possibly some kind of a 9-to-5 type situation. One day I sat down for lunch with a mentor of mine. I was very lucky. I happened to know him. He was local in the community that I grew up in. And I asked him one day to go to lunch with me. And this gentleman is very, you wouldn't know him. He's not like a public figure or anything. But he actually sold his business for $114 million. So very, very successful. I was very lucky. He said yes to have lunch with me, someone I just kind of reached out to. And a couple things really stood out to me from that particular lunch. The first was that, let's face it, he could have bought that entire restaurant, in fact, the entire chain of restaurants, and he would still have lots of money left over. Yet there he was looking at the menu, considering the value of each item on the menu. I'll always remember he even made a comment about how, oh, that seems overpriced and that seems well priced. And it dawned on me that, someone doesn't become wealthy by wasting their money, right? So that was the first thing that I remember from that dinner. The second thing was that he said to me, you know what, Tim, anything you want in life is going to come from other people. And that reverberated with me for a while. He went on to say, if you want to get out of doing all the frontline work, then you need staff. That's other people. If you're going to raise money for opportunities, that's other people. If you're going to have people buy your products and services, that's your customers or your clients. Those are other people. And it really hit me that day to realize how much my success depended on other people. So yet again, this idea of my network is my net worth started coming to mind. And even someone like my mentor being in my life, he was someone who was closer to me, and because I had proximity to him, now all of a sudden I could get these amazing insights and learnings. So for me, this idea of proximity of power is power it started to really, really grow. And I started to realize I needed to think more and more about the environment that I was in. Yes, I was already surrounded by a handful, maybe a dozen or so entrepreneurs in my home city, but it's not like I was really interacting with people who'd built significant businesses or thought leaders that were proven to have generated dozens and dozens of successful students. So around the time, I'd also read a book called Never Eat Alone by Keith Ferrazzi. And in the book, he describes how he used good old-fashioned personal connections to get to where he was in his career. And every time that he would have a meal, he would do his best to think about how he could not eat alone. And obviously, he's not eating alone because he was having dinner with someone else or lunch with someone else. So I started thinking about how I could do the same. And I started hosting dinner parties in my home city. And even though I was still living so far away, I started hosting what I would call TF in LA or TF in New York City or TF in Las Vegas, TF in Vancouver, whatever city I was going to. And I would just go on Facebook and instantly I would just write, who are my friends in New York or LA or wherever, and then I'd also pull up my phone and I would just scroll through and see who was in what city that I was visiting. And that allowed me to now start getting proximity to other entrepreneurs, some of which who were definitely further ahead than I was in each of the cities that I'd go to. And even though I didn't have immediate proximity by living in the same city, I was starting to generate like this satellite proximity. And likewise in my own home city, I was getting kind of like a slowly starting to get a wider circle of entrepreneurs around me. And it'd be over those dinners that people would mention a really good idea that stuck with me, or it would be at one of my TF in New York events that I would meet someone who introduced me to someone who introduced me to someone. So eventually I started coming to the United States so much that I wanted to take this idea of proximity as power to the next level. And I literally just moved to the United States. And I have to tell you that really turbocharged everything. In fact, I started developing this concept called the 7 pillars, which I'll tell you in just a moment, which is kind of the more advanced version. And I also discovered this one question that was absolutely transformative, and I'll tell you about that in a moment. And before I tell you about it, I was blown away because within about 6 months of moving to Austin, I was starting to get tagged as one of the most connected guys in the entire city. And I'd only been in the United States for 6 months, and I'd only been in Austin for 6 months, so it was quite amazing. After that, I started getting invited to private events. So people who would normally spend $30,000 a year to be in masterminds, they would know each other back here in Austin, and they would start hanging out with each other, and they'd have a dinner, or they would have they'd get like a lake house for the weekend or something on Lake Travis, and I would start getting invited to these things. And I'm thinking, holy smokes, I don't even need to spend $30,000 to go to some of these masterminds. I can literally just keep being in Austin. And what fueled a lot of that was that I was hosting a lot of dinner parties here in Austin. Just like I used to do TF in New York or TF in LA, I was now doing TF in Austin along with my good friend Tan. We were doing that basically every 2 weeks. Within 2.5 years of living in Austin, my friend and I had hosted 42 dinner parties with 8 new entrepreneurs every single time. So we effectively had dinner with around 350 entrepreneurs. Absolutely incredible. Before I knew it, at my fingertips, I had this like Rolodex of experts who were had huge success in podcasting or YouTube channels or whatnot. And just knowing that I could just pick up the phone and text someone who otherwise would be inaccessible to the everyday person was very, very, very powerful and helped me solve a lot of questions in my business. This approach that proximity is power and meeting powerful people and just being around and adding value to them by creating introductions or whatnot has really, really paid off in some extraordinary ways. In fact, my friend Tan and I, through our hosting, we decided to start hosting large-scale socials where it's like 200 to 300 people. We'll have a theme like a white party or fire and ice, women in red, guys in blue, models, dancers, aerialists, ice sculptures, like the whole thing. Excuse me. And lo and behold, at one of our events at our Fire and Ice party about a year and a half ago, there was someone there who actually worked for the United Nations. And just recently she approached us and asked us if we would be interested in producing a mixer literally for the United Nations when the UN event comes to Austin. So now you think about who's going to be in that room, and that room is going to be full of worldwide dignitaries, very high-end wealthy business owners, and we get to be a very public face inside of that, welcoming everybody, hosting everybody to the social. So to me, this one question and this one framework, which I call the proximities power question and the 7 pillars, have really, really accelerated the way that my career and my life has gone. And I think what I've really realized is that, yes, I'm still working hard, not as hard as before, that's for sure. But when you work pretty hard, like above average hard, and you apply it to the right kind of smart strategy, that is such an incredibly amazing accelerator. And, to me, to be surrounded by the right people when you're making that same level of effort is just such an amazing shortcut. It's like a cheat code to life. And I really, really recommend that you now think about how can you get more proximity as power in your life. So here's the single question, here's the 7 pillars framework as well. So the single question, I've heard different versions of this. I think Eben Pagan actually had a version of this question. The question, and I think this is the number one question you can ask yourself to take advantage of all the power of what I'm teaching you here today, is what would your environment have to look like that your success is virtually guaranteed? I'll say that again. What would your environment have to look like such that your success is virtually guaranteed? I once heard about a book, Benjamin Hardy, I forget what it's called. And essentially, it's called Willpower is Weak. The premise of that book is basically that, yes, you can have all the willpower that you want in the world and chant mantras and do all these things solo, and that might work for some people. But for the vast majority of people, we are incredibly weak, sensitive, and vulnerable. And I am one of those, there's no question about it. I am so sensitive to the world around me. And I mean that like in my apartment, in my physical space, I mean that in my social space, I mean that in my business space, that I have to be very careful about what I have in my environment. Now, I would say that the proximity is power question, which I've just shared with you, is maybe an introduction to this idea. If you want to go to an advanced level of this idea, that's where the 7 pillars comes in. So the 7 pillars are skill set, mindset, coaching, community, tools, strategy, and environment. So skill set. Do I have the right skills to accomplish what I want to accomplish? And guess what? If you live in proximity or you work in proximity to some people who have those skills, you'll get those skills much more quickly. Mindset. Do I have the right attitude and belief system to accomplish what I want to accomplish? Well, guess what? Once again, if you have proximity to people who have the right kind of mindset, you're just going to pick it up by osmosis. And I could keep going. Coaching, community, tools, strategy, and then like physical environment. I think first we choose our friends, and then our friends make us. I think first we choose our habits, and then our habits make us. And first we choose our media, what we allow to come in our brain, and then our media makes us. And if we're constantly watching things about growth and education and new skills and inspiring stories, we just can't help but get better at what we do and believe more and more. At the same time, if we're investing our energy into places that are constantly negative or constantly like kind of consumer media rather than producer media, places where it's all about how big is the car or how fast is the car, how big is the house, how fancy are the people and the clothes, and we move away from consuming a lot of that and more into producer media, the aforementioned items I talked about, growth, skills, inspiration, all the rest, we just literally can't help but flood our brain, and that becomes our reality. So I highly encourage you, even at the bare minimum, is just to ask yourself, what is one change that you could make in your environment such that if it did, you'd be one step closer to your success being virtually guaranteed. And I think if you start making those changes, they don't have to be wholesale changes, they don't have to be huge changes, they could just be small things, week by week, one more thing, one more thing, one more thing. I think you'll be absolutely amazed how much success becomes absolutely automatic. Hopefully that's helpful. Thank you so much for being here on this journey. Please do consider liking, commenting, and subscribing. The more that you do that, the more that YouTube helps me and you find our fellow entrepreneur and to share with them the great wisdom that I've been very lucky to gain here, and that I'm really standing on the shoulders of giants. And so if I can help light the torch of someone else, that would mean the world to me. So please do go ahead, like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.